Every organization that lasts for generations begins with a moment that seems small at the time. A meeting, a handshake, a shared idea. In 1957, in Prince George's County, Maryland, a small group of motorcycle riders came together looking for something that many men of that era were searching for: brotherhood. The Second World War had ended more than a decade earlier, but the cultural shift it created was still being felt across America. Many veterans had returned home carrying the memory of tight-knit units, adrenaline, and camaraderie that normal civilian life simply could not replicate. Motorcycles became an outlet. They represented speed, independence, and freedom from routine. Across the United States, small motorcycle clubs began forming. Some were casual riding groups. Others slowly evolved into something more structured. One of those early groups would become the Pagans Motorcycle Club. At the center of that early formation was a man named Lou Dobkin. Dobkin was not a national celebrity. He was not a media figure. In fact, very little about him was meant for the public eye. What he did possess, however, was the ability to bring riders together under a shared identity. An identity is the foundation of any organization. The club Dobkin helped establish did not begin with a grand plan for national expansion. It began with a small circle of riders who shared a love of motorcycles and a sense of independence from mainstream expectations. In the late 1950s, motorcycle culture in America was still developing. The idea of outlaw motorcycle clubs had not yet reached the level of attention it would later receive. Most riders simply gathered, rode together, and built friendships around the road. But some groups adopted a stronger internal culture. They developed hierarchy, rules, symbols. These elements created something stronger than a casual club. They created loyalty. Dobkin's group eventually adopted a name that stood apart from the typical motorcycle clubs forming across the country: Pagans. The name itself carried symbolism. It suggested independence from established institutions. It suggested a group that operated by its own code. Names matter. They shape perception. And in the world of motorcycle clubs, symbolism is part of identity. Soon after its founding, the club adopted a patch that would become one of the most recognizable symbols in the outlaw motorcycle world: a flaming Norse figure. The image represented Surtur, a fire giant from Norse mythology associated with destruction and rebirth. Fire spreads, it grows, transforms, and in many ways the symbol captured what the club itself would become. The patch stitched onto the back of a leather vest became more than decoration. It became a statement. Membership in the club was not simply about riding motorcycles. It was about belonging to a group that shared loyalty and structure. As the years passed, the club began to expand. Small gatherings turned into chapters. Chapters created presence. Presence created reputation. Across Maryland and neighboring states, the name began to carry recognition. Expansion was never simple. As motorcycle culture evolved in the 1960s and 1970s, clubs across the country developed stronger identities and territorial influence. Some became widely known. Others remained regional forces. The Pagans grew steadily along the East Coast. Maryland, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey. Each new chapter meant more riders wearing the patch. But growth also brings attention, and attention brings pressure. As law enforcement agencies began paying closer attention to outlaw motorcycle clubs nationwide, groups like the Pagans found themselves under increasing scrutiny. Media narratives began to shape public perception. Headlines focused on conflict and investigations. But inside the club, the identity remained centered on brotherhood. Members rode together. Chapters maintained structure. Leadership roles developed. Presidents oversaw local chapters. Sergeants-at-arms enforced internal discipline. The hierarchy helped maintain cohesion as membership grew. Without structure, expansion fractures. With structure, organizations endure. Dobkin's early influence helped establish that foundation. Founders often fade into the background once an organization grows beyond its earliest members. But their impact remains in the structure they create. The early decisions made in Maryland during the late 1950s shaped the culture that would carry the club forward for decades. The club that began as a small group of riders eventually became a recognized presence across large portions of the East Coast. Symbols travel, stories spread, reputation builds over time. But longevity is not created by reputation alone. It requires adaptation. Across the decades that followed, the Pagans would face multiple challenges: rivalries, investigations, public scrutiny, internal restructuring. Each era brought new pressures, yet the symbol remained. The flaming Norse figure continued to appear on leather vests worn by riders across multiple states. That endurance traces back to the earliest days of the club's formation. Lou Dobkin likely never imagined that the small club he helped establish would still exist more than 60 years later. Few founders do. Organizations that survive across generations often evolve far beyond their original vision. But their origins remain important. They explain how something began. They reveal the values that shaped early culture. And they show how identity forms. The Norse Fire did not start as a national phenomenon. It started in a local community, in garages, on roads, among riders who shared a passion for motorcycles and independence. From those beginnings, the fire spread outward, slowly, deliberately, chapter by chapter. And once a symbol gains meaning within a community, it becomes difficult to extinguish. More than 6 decades later, the legacy of that early decision continues to shape the story. The name, the patch, the structure, they all trace back to the moment a group of riders chose to build something together. Lou Dobkin's role as founder places him at the beginning of that story, the man behind the first spark. But once a fire spreads, it begins a life of its own. And the next phase of the story belongs to the leaders who carried that fire forward. Next episode, Keith Conan Richter, the modern leader,